Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and right over there is Nikki Cece Kinzer.
I was wondering if you were going to say Cece.
Of course, I'm going to drop that every time.
Of course.
I can. I don't know why, but for some reason, our podcasting tool has labeled you Guest Cece this morning, and that has just become your nickname.
I know, right? I like it.
I like it, too. She's really smart about technology, Cece.
I know.
She answers questions.
The tech. That's a huge thing for our audience because they know I'm not the tech person and I actually solved a tech issue.
Cece is amazing.
Yeah.
You need to hang out with that lady.
A little bit more in my life. Yes.
We've got some fantastic guests who are going to help us answer the question, how do I talk to others about my ADHD? Before we invite them to begin speaking, we want you to do the drill. You head over to takecontroladhd.com and get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website, subscribe to our mailing list, or right on the homepage to get an email each time a new episode is posted. You can connect with us on Twitter or Facebook at Take Control ADHD and call us. You can leave us a voicemail at 503-664-4ADD to get your voice, thoughts, and questions on the show. And for those of you who have already joined our Patreon, patreon.com/the ADHD podcast, we sure appreciate it. Thank you so much for your consideration this fine ADHD Awareness Month. It means a lot. We really appreciate it. Okay, let's dig in. I'm so excited about this. Gabriel Villarreal and Heather Clift are hosts of Informed Consent, a podcast designed to support and nurture incoming mental health clinicians who are in the trenches. Heather's a licensed professional counselor specializing in anxiety, trauma, family transitions, and counselor supervision. Gabriel is a resident in counseling, soon to be licensed practicing counselor providing therapy at his practice, ADHD Counseling. He's also a coach at his gym, Lost Boys Strength and Conditioning. Both join us from Roanoke, Virginia. Heather and Gabriel, welcome to the ADHD podcast.
Thank you for having us with you.
Yeah, thanks. Our pleasure.
Excellent. Okay, so how to talk to others about our ADHD. Nikki, this came from the survey, yes?
It did. I got so much great information from that summer survey. So again, I just want to say thank you to everybody who participated because it really does give us a great idea of what people are thinking and what they want to know more about. And this was a common concern and challenge that people had. And it really was just how to talk to other people about my ADHD. How do I get people to understand it? And you know, it really starts, I think, because there's so many misconceptions and wrong myths out there about ADHD of what it is and what it isn't. And you know, even just as recent as this weekend, I had somebody ask me why it mattered if somebody got diagnosed later in life. And I just was dumbfounded. I was like, of course it matters. They're still living.
Wait. Why? Oh, you mean what does it matter? Because
they've been living with it all this time. Like, what does it matter if they got?
Yeah, why bother?
Yeah, why
kind of
bother?
Thing?
And I'm like, it definitely matters because now they have a better understanding of who they are and how they think.
Oh yeah, no. I gotta go sit in the closet and cry.
I know. It was really.
That makes me so sad.
That was just this weekend. So I mean, it's real. It's out there. Those misconceptions are out there. I hope I did my best to educate that particular person, and maybe they'll think more about it in a different way anyway. And that's what really ADHD awareness is all about, right? I mean, that's what we want to do is talk about it and educate people about it. But I still think people think it's the little boy in the classroom who can't sit still, or they kind of forget that women have ADHD too, and or they'll just admit that I just don't know anything about it. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what this is. You know what I'm saying there, Pete, right?
I do. And it's still, I'm just sad.
I know. I'm sorry.
It just makes me sad.
I didn't mean to start this.
I did. You really brought it down.
Yeah. So we have our guests here, and I wanted to talk to them from their perspective to talk about how to not only break these misconceptions that people have, but how do we talk to people about ADHD and without that fear, I think, because I think I don't know if you can take the fear out. That's what I want to know. I mean, can you take that fear away from talking about it to others? What do you guys think? Heather, Gabriel, what do you guys think?
Whenever we talk to someone about whatever it is that's going on with us, especially with ADHD, we need to be really clear about how ADHD affects the person, how it affects, like if I'm going to talk to someone about how ADHD would affect me, I would need to be real clear on how that does happen. I need to know what my strengths and weaknesses are, because ADHD manifests differently in everyone.
Being really clear about how it affects you and
Yeah.
what that means to you as an individual, not just as ADHD as a whole.
And providing them with some resources, if this is a teacher, or if this is a spouse or a friend or a boss, depending upon who it is that we're talking to, what information do we need to share with that person? Because it doesn't have to be, we don't have to give everyone all of this information. We don't have to have a blanket cheat sheet to tell someone how ADHD affects us. We need to tailor it to who we're speaking to, know your audience kind of thing.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that's so scary about it, right? Is that if you don't, I'm thinking about so many of the questions that come in are, people who struggle with ADHD at work, for example, when they go to the office and they find themselves late on projects, or they're struggling to focus, and they're struggling because they're in maybe an open work environment. That's all the rage right now, is just, here, everybody sits in a fishbowl and go ahead and be productive. And it's hard. So people write in, how do I talk to my boss about this? I don't want to set myself up. I'm feeling judged. I'm feeling like everybody's staring at me, and it's creating a really sort of terrifying kind of work environment. So you see where that fear kind of comes from, because you don't want to put your job at risk. You don't want to put your your livelihood at risk, or your maybe your social experience. But one of the things we've been talking about over the last several weeks is this idea that there is a sort of assumed normative baseline when you're talking to somebody who doesn't have ADHD, who isn't experienced with someone with ADHD, that the world around them is what is, quote, normal, and everything else is something that has to adjust to that. And that can make it really challenging when you're coming to the experience of ADHD, and in cultivating an experience of openness. How do you engender that sort of positive relationship with people who you need to work with or experience life with?
When I saw what you guys wanted to talk to us about, I was like, oh man, like I don't. For your listeners, I have ADHD, inattentive, and I was like, I don't know how I would. I was trying to think back of all the bosses that I've had, all of the relationships that I've had, and it sort of has just come up. I do know the last job that I had, when I interviewed for that, it was just being very upfront. Like, I suck at documentation. I'm an amazing therapist, a really great clinician, but getting notes in on time and doing them the exact detail-oriented way that you want them, you need to have some leniency. But if you want your clients to make some change, then you need to hire me. So I think, to Heather's point, it's you have to know what you're really good at and what you're not, and what your weaknesses are. I mean, let's be completely honest. I cannot think of a situation where you come out to your boss and tell them I have ADHD and they fire you. That wouldn't happen ever. And if they like you enough, and if you do a good enough job, they're going to want to support you to keep you on as a supportive player in the job. So I think when I hear this conversation, what I'm hearing is these listeners that are writing into you, it's all their stuff that they're kind of projecting. It's all their stuff in terms of like, I was really terrible in school because I had ADHD, and that's the case across the board. And it's just not.
Well, to your point, I totally agree, and I think that we have a real natural proclivity for taking ourselves to the worst case and making that the only reality that is possible. You know
Limiting
what I mean?
belief, yeah, right.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's sort of where we stand. But it's interesting. We have. We have listeners who struggle, not necessarily because they've come out, with their ADHD to their employer, but that their behavior around their ADHD is causing them to get into some trouble. For example, that in their effort to be open, they are not able to stop themselves from writing email. And so they write a lot of email, and their supervisors are being notified that they write too much email and they have to stop emailing outside of their department. They're being reprimanded because they can't stop themselves from this sort of behavior. And so it's becoming a disciplinary thing, right? This symptom of ADHD that they're really struggling with. This is just one example of the kind of struggles that are coming up, and we end up getting copied on these emails and sort of watching them have to figure out how not only to talk about needing an accommodation, but needing understanding from a very large company with very many disconnected pieces. And here's just one person who wants to make the world a better place inside the company, and is doing it so much they need them to stop. It's just the one example that keeps coming up in my head that makes this whole conversation a little bit more scary.
Yeah, I think I guess what I hear when you say that is if it is becoming an issue, I think it's probably too late to come out and say I have ADHD. There's an old African proverb that says the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The next best time is today. So I think if you are struggling with when should I come out, when should I let them know that there's this thing that I do that I haven't learned to manage fully yet, that may be something that I want to bring up. And maybe not in your interview like I did. I own my ADHD. I wholeheartedly believe that my ADHD is a strength. So I'm very upfront with that information. But if you're not there yet, it may be a conversation that you want to have later on. But I think the sooner the better, and hopefully you'll be able to gauge how your peers are going to receive that, whether that peer be a coworker or a boss, and just give them the information that they need. You don't need to overload them with, this is everything. This is all the accommodations that I need. It's just in this situation, this happens. And I just wanted to, bring that to your attention.
And, Pete, we've talked about that before when we had other episodes about, do you talk about your ADHD with the work environment? And I think that's a kind of a spin that we took on it too, was, you don't necessarily have to say you have ADHD. You can just simply say, I'm not good with the documentation. So I'm going to need an assistant, or I'm going to need some help here with the documentation, but I know I'm really good at this. I'm really good with clients. I'm really, so really emphasizing the good, but not even necessarily bringing up the ADHD, just that this is a weakness, we've talked about that, at least in the work environment, it makes sense.
And I think coming at it with some solutions is
right.
helpful too, and
yes.
not just say, hey, I suck at documentation, and what's for lunch? Let's kind of move on. But I know for me and my part, I do suck at documentation. It's has been an issue since internship, and I've learned to make it good enough where everyone's satisfied. It's not stellar. It's not outstanding, but being upfront about that and saying this is how I've managed to make sure everything, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. So being a little solution focused will probably quell any anxieties that your boss, if they, I shouldn't say that it wouldn't happen, but in case it does happen, that their anxieties are kind of put to bed also.
So I have a question for people who are newly diagnosed. A lot of times I will get clients that were just diagnosed, I have a client I'm working with right now who just was diagnosed in June. And so it's very new to her, and she's really learning as much as she can about it. And my question to you guys is that she's eager to learn, like she's really embracing it, but I know that there's a lot of people that don't embrace it. A lot of people aren't relieved, they don't know what to do with it. And they may have a hard time talking to family and friends. So I'm not talking about I'm not talking about the work environment. I'm talking about how do I talk to my spouse about this, or my partner, or my kids? These relationships that are really close to me, my parents, what would be your advice or guidance on that when they don't really know maybe how it affects them yet?
That's a great time to get curious about what others see. the first thing we have to do is let go of our fear and our anxiety about how others perceive us. Because when we make the conversation about our fear, then our fear is the only thing that we're really talking about. We're not actually getting information across or gaining any information. I think once we can decide the fear and say, I just got this diagnosis. Here's the things that I said to this professional and that professional that led them to this diagnosis. Here's some information I've learned. I wonder what you guys see, kind of thing. Just opening it up and saying, how do you perceive me? Do I do these things? Do you see something different? Kind of thing, and starting a conversation.
I like that.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that I do if I do have a child or an adult come in and we do diagnose them as an ADHDer, the first line of, I guess, defense, if you even want to think about it that way, is here's 3 or 4 books. If this doesn't work for you, here's an Audible link for a free month. Go download it and go learn together. Go understand this together, because if it's a total surprise to the actual ADHDer, it may be a surprise to their significant other or their parents or whoever. And going at it together is going to be a lot easier, because then you have someone to process it with. You have someone to laugh, like, oh, that's why I do that. Oh, that's why you did that, like that one time. And it becomes a collaborative process where everyone is learning together. And if you take it from that approach, I can't see how you guys don't become stronger going about it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, that is just absolutely my experience too. Like the world changes once you are sort of allowed to be, or once you avail yourself to being able to be open about your own behavior. Like, and I was diagnosed as an adult too, and I just remember it was like lightning struck. Like so many things become clear, and that, even though the experience of and sort of the cultural reality of ADHD is generally, or the perception is generally negative, it became such a positive and empowering experience because I now had a definition.
No, I think that goes a long way. Even just having a definition. I think at the beginning of the episode, you guys talked about kind of explaining it to your coworkers or to your bosses. I think as a general rule of thumb, I assume that people either A, have zero information about ADHD, or they have incredibly wrong information about ADHD. And I think I can kind of make that assumption by working in the mental health field and having clinicians that don't know what they're talking about. And parents who maybe have ADHD that still don't know what they're talking about. And then even, people that have ADHD that are older than me, and I'm still like, I don't know that that's 100% right. That may be your experience, but that's not the experience of everyone ever. So helping everyone kind of get educated and learning together, because there's so many misconceptions and myths that are just wrong. And then, I don't know any myths or misconceptions that are ever positive,
Right.
Yeah, right.
It's all negative stuff. And you don't want to carry that that misinformation baggage with you for the rest of your life, because it's wrong.
Well, and I think it goes back to what Heather was saying too, really understanding how it affects you, because it does affect everybody differently. And so I think having, like you said, that conversation too, that it's not one size fits all. It's going to be different for everyone. I have a question for Pete and Gabriel, and Heather, you too. Heather, do you have ADHD? I'm not sure if you do or don't.
I don't have ADHD. Gabriel's laughing right now.
I'm going to have this question be to Gabriel and to Pete. Both of you strike me as people who are very, you're very comfortable in your own skin. You're comfortable talking about ADHD. Pete, I know you are, because here you're doing it publicly. and so are you, Gabriel. I mean, you have a podcast, you're doing it publicly. You're helping, that's the specialty that you want to go into. I am really curious, and I know there are many listeners out there who are really curious about, how did you get to that point? How are you comfortable with talking about it? How are you accepting it?
That's a really good question. I think when I'm talking about my ADHD, I often tell the story of, I put on a good face, and I am very confident and comfortable with my skin, but I also give the disclaimer that it wasn't always this way. The story that I tell is being in middle school and flipping through flashcards, trying to learn my multiplication tables, and just being furious with not being able to get them and having to stop. I probably was there for 30 minutes. It seemed like hours and hours and hours. But I finally had to stop because I couldn't see the cards anymore because I was crying so hard. So it was not all sunshine and rainbows. More often than not, school was a huge issue. However, where I became confident was I found what I really, really loved, and everything became infinitely easier. I really kind of embraced, before I even knew it, kind of embraced this model of you need to stick with what you're really good at and avoid the things that you aren't good at. And that lesson came with failing calculus twice in college, switching my major to psychology, and kind of learning a little bit about childhood psychopathology. And that class that I took in my senior year of college was really hard. We had like 20 kids, and by the end of the semester, we had like 3. But I remember being like, this stuff is really easy. This is not hard. Like, we're talking about it, and I'm reading the book, and it's interesting, and it's really, really easy. And then even in graduate school to get my my master's in clinical mental health, I really discovered how I learn best, and that's I learn auditorily. So I don't read books anymore. I just listen to audiobooks. And I could literally sit in class, 3-hour-long class with ADHD, with a cup of coffee and nothing else. I really kind of found my way in that sense. And I think more often than not, ADHDers kind of have a measuring stick and say, I need to do things the way that everyone else does. And that's not, no one does that. Not ADHD or otherwise, no one does that. One of the metaphors that I kind of use for my younger kids in practice is, they're a rooster on a farm, and the farmer has put them in a black box, and that black box is school. And the farmer is confused why this rooster is never crowing at the sun, but it's in a black box. It's only until that that rooster can come out and see the sun that it will crow. And I think for the ADHD, more often than not, they are in that box being forced to perform in a way that they cannot.
I just have to, can you please, I wish, I know this is audio, but sometimes I wish like we could have flashing lights or something, to highlight stuff.
Do you want me to like insert a klaxon horn in the show? Would that help?
Pay attention to what he just said. Rewind if you didn't get it, because it is so important what you just said. And I'm so glad you said that, because I see it every single day where people, I should be doing it this way. Why is it so easy for everybody else? And comparing themselves to everyone else, whether they have ADHD or not. And so I'm just so glad that you brought that to our listeners' attention. And I hope they really take that to heart, that you don't need to compare yourself to anybody, and give yourself, just put the pressure off. I love that. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
You're welcome. One of the other metaphors, if I have a client that's like kind of nerdy and like superheroes, I love superheroes. I love Superman.
Sing it, brother.
So so one of the other metaphors that I use is that Superman is only Superman when he's under a yellow sun. Superman's just like you and I when he's under a red sun. And so that's why he was sent to Earth, so he could be under a yellow sun and be Superman. So when I'm trying to teach my kids this idea of play to your strengths, that's the kind of conversation that I have with them, is you need to position yourself under a yellow sun. And if you're not under a yellow sun, if you know you're going to be in a position where you are not going to showcase your strengths, then either find a way around it or avoid it at all costs, or find a way to like muscle through it if it's absolutely necessary. And most things, for kids, most things are absolutely necessary, but some of them aren't. And you can find, accommodations or even little tips and tricks to kind of give you that little bit of an edge, to kind of showcase what you really know. That conversation usually comes around like test taking and things like that.
Well, and that can apply to adults easily. I mean, exactly what you just said. It can apply to adults in their, in their everyday living situations as well.
No doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Yet talking to teachers and getting parents on board when you're talking about children, having parents be able to articulate what their children need, and to get as parents that you don't take the pressure off. You're going to parent differently because that's what your child needs. Every child needs to be parented differently. So if your child's an ADHDer, you need to parent him or her differently. And the teacher helping to articulate that to teachers is really important.
Agreed. Don't take recess away, please.
Oh, amen.
That's my biggest pet peeve, is that that's what they still do, and it's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that.
Add more.
Add more, exactly.
Please.
Yeah. Pete, what about you? I know people are going to want to hear about you too.
Oh, well, I don't know how interesting it is. It's a similar sort of parallel to Gabriel's story. Though it's interesting, most of my undergraduate was in, my first undergraduate was in psychology, and I struggled. I struggled with it. It wasn't until I switched over to broadcast journalism and that I really thrived, and that the sort of TV newsroom environment early in my career was something that was just a hallelujah moment. I mean, I was able to move from thing to thing and focus very quickly, and move to another story and write a quick story and do my research and do an interview and move on, and everything changed, so dynamically, so quickly throughout the day. I just thrived, and then to sit at the anchor desk and have the lights on, and everything was such a high degree of stimulus that it was really easy for me to stay focused on what I needed to stay focused on, and it was great. And so this was before I was diagnosed. I didn't know why I was actually doing well in that environment, but it was, everything changed. And I think that held until I was diagnosed, accidentally diagnosed in marriage counseling, when the therapist said, you guys are fine as a couple now. Pete, why don't you stick around and talk about ADHD? Your ADHD. I didn't even know I had ADHD. He just sort of figured that out, and that was when my journey really began. And that was sort of later, and explained to me everything about my experience. So what made me comfortable talking about it was, I think, the momentum of finding out late in life. Like it was such an awakening of a moment for me that I found myself just sort of fueled by the experience, a sort of endorphin rush of knowing something new about myself. I wanted to tell everybody, and I didn't see any baggage at all, because suddenly I felt like I felt like I wanted to call all my old bosses and say, this is why I was doing that thing that one time. Hope you're well. Happy Friday. Bye. And then hang up.
I can totally see you doing that.
Yeah. I felt like I wanted to clean the slate, because I got it now. I understand. And so that's why we do this podcast.
I just think this is great, and I'm glad. I mean, thank you guys for sharing your stories. I can only imagine that they're going to resonate with some people, and I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We did talk to Melissa Orlove a little bit about, when you first start dating somebody, do you say, hey, guess what? I have ADHD.
That was such a good episode.
Yeah.
It was so good.
And it was great. And I think she answered that question that might not be necessary on that first date. But really when I think of that question, I think, when is the right time, or how do you explain it or talk to a romantic partner that you might be getting serious with? I kind of go back to what Heather was saying at the very beginning. And again, just kind of talking it. Well, I think hopefully getting to that point where you're comfortable with it and know how it affects you, and then be able to talk to that person openly about it. And by golly, I mean, if that person is not receptive in a positive way, then it's probably not the right partner for you. I mean, it's not going to work, right? I mean, am I crazy for thinking that?
No.
Nope. See ya.
Yeah.
Get out the door. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not going away. So I can only imagine that's a good deal breaker.
Yeah. I always say to any client, really, or anybody I meet, if the person is meeting you with that kind of negativity, you don't want that person in your life. Doesn't matter what they bring to the table.
Yeah, and I can't imagine they wouldn't catch on. I know, like, for me, like, I do some pretty weird stuff. And by weird stuff, I mean, I have a stand-up desk I'm standing at, and Heather's sitting on the couch recording this. And I stand all the time. Like, I do all of my work standing, because if I sit down, it takes me that much longer to kind of get into a focus state. But if I stand, I slip right in. I drink coffee at regular intervals. I'm very regimented about when I sleep. Like, that kind of stuff is gonna, like, people are gonna notice that. Like, normal, neurotypical people, as they're called, don't do that kind of stuff. So it's gonna come up where they're gonna be like, hey, why do you do that? And that's probably the good time to say, oh, like, I have ADHD and this just helps me focus. Oh, okay. What movie are we gonna watch tonight? Move on. Like, it's not like coming out like you have like some like terminal disease. It's not like,
Right.
And I listened to that episode you guys were talking about, and it seemed, or I guess it sounded like that's how these your listeners were kind of wanted to present the information. Like, I have to tell you guys something. I have to tell you something, and it's like, it's not. It's all good. Like,
it seems to be like it's only as big a deal as you make it.
Right.
I mean, if you present it like it's a terminal disease, then oh my gosh, maybe it's terminal ADHD. Oh my god.
Right. And I think hopefully a good partner is going to say, well, how do you manage that? I know that's, sometimes that's what my wife has to say if we have to go to like a family function where I know I'm going to be sitting down the entire time. It's like, how are you gonna cope with that? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess I'll work out a little bit harder today, or I guess I'll do something to kind of get the jitters out, because this is going to be long and arduous, and this is just what I have to do.
Ask how you're going to deal with that, how you're going to cope with that.
Yeah.
That's another episode, but that's a great way to give you that responsibility. Yeah,
because she knows that I'm going to be like, and huffing and puffing and crossing my legs and wiggling in my seat. And I don't know why that's strange, because I can think of many people in both sides of my families, my in-laws and my family, that have ADHD. So it's like, I'm not doing anything that you guys don't do anyways.
Aren't
So
doing
like,
right.
what's like, we all got it from somewhere.
That's what I was thinking as you were saying that. It made me laugh. Like, you say, hey, I'm sorry, I have ADHD. The answer will probably not be, okay, what do you want to watch tonight? The answer will probably be, oh yeah, me too.
Right.
I mean, that's just kind of where we are right now.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning of this episode, I was trying to think like how I came out to all of my friends, but all of my best friends have ADHD. Like, all of my, and it was just like, it's like, oh, we met like back when I don't know, they may still do it, like at school, when after lunch you all had to like corral the cats into the nurse's office to take their medication. It was just like, oh yeah, cool. Oh yeah, cool. Oh, that's why we get along so well, is because we both have this thing. So yeah, they probably already know.
I can hear Heather laughing in the background.
I know. It's so funny.
Well, this is great, you guys. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and ideas with us on the show today. I really appreciate your time.
Now, give us a plug. Tell us about informed consent and where you want people to go to learn more about you guys.
Heather and I were like gesturing at each other, like, you do it. So yeah, informedconsentpodcast.com. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker hosts us, and podcast is Informed Consent Podcast.
Oh, links, as always, everybody, in the show notes. Swipe over on your portable podcasty device, and you can tap on those links and learn more about Gabriel and Heather and the podcast and their work, and even the Lost Boys gym.
That's right.
That may be another podcast in itself. Is
Oh, exercise.
The role of your workouts in your ADHD.
Yeah, we could talk for hours. We could talk for hours.
It will be another podcast.
Yeah, get and wait for that podcast, because you won't finish this up.
Well, thank you everybody for downloading and listening to the show. As always, we appreciate your time and your attention. On behalf of Gabriel Villarreal and Heather Clift of the Informed Consent Podcast and Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll catch you next week right here on Taking Control, the ADHD Podcast.